Hello, good morning, and welcome from me, Anne McElvoy, in Washington, D.C. with Politico. It's Tuesday, April the 28th. On this side of the Atlantic, the King has a unity message designed to repair this special relationship with a plea later today to Congress to make sure that the two nations disagree politely. We've not always seen eye to eye, he's expected to say, but time and time again, our two countries have found ways to come together. That is manifesting the positive and hoping for the best.
I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. My goodness, the mood couldn't be different this side of the Atlantic. It's all less eye to eye, more eye for an eye this side of the Atlantic, where politics is going to ratchet up and get ever more fraught. We've got quite the day for you ahead. Sorry about the contrasting tones. That's just how it is. Later today, we have a vote which will become effectively a proxy on the survival of the Prime Minister after two absolutely torrid weeks for him, where we've seen self-inflicted wounds and the mood in the Cabinet and the Parliamentary Labour Party darken.
So Keir Starmer, all but certain to win the vote later today to block a blockbuster inquiry into whether he misled the Commons by the Privileges Committee, which is being pushed by the Tories. But he's had to wheel out the big guns. He's summoning Gordon Brown and MPs, subjected to perhaps the biggest whipping operation of his premiership, because it's a moment when everyone can measure internal Labour dissent, and it is clear that many on his own side aren't happy. How many will vote or abstain to make the case, and what is the capital that he is using up by having to resort to these measures?
It's quite the season finale to this parliamentary year, which ends tomorrow with prorogation, actually after PMQs, slightly later than we thought. I would say that the mood last night in Westminster, Anne, which you're missing, is somewhere between DEFCON 1 and 2. And it's not just, the incredible thing about today is that it's not just about that one vote. It's about so many other big, important signals that we're getting all over the place about a government that is losing its grip.
We'll take you through that in a moment in more detail, but in summary, last night the government released an extraordinary letter from Ian Collard, the head of security at the Foreign Office, which appears to back the version of events around Peter Mandelson's vetting given by Ollie Robbins in his hearing, raising the question of why Number 10 ever went to war with the senior mandarin sacked by Starmer, and that has inflicted so much damage and unleashed so much controversy about the Prime Minister's judgment.
And that's the beginning of just yet another day where we look forward to, and I say that phrase advisedly, hours and hours of hearings into the Mandelson vetting affair with Philip Barton, who was Ollie Robbins' predecessor, who could speak to the efforts about, all those people inside government who were trying to get the appointment of Peter Mandelson's done properly against the pressure from Number 10. And then this is another biggie which could go either way for Keir Starmer, the appearance of Morgan McSweeney, who until February was his chief of staff. I really don't remember a prime ministerial chief of staff appearing before MPs and effectively appearing in an extended way in public so soon after they leave their job by going before a select committee. Anne.
There's evidence elsewhere of the government losing grip, this time in the Commons. Last night, they caved on something they'd resisted time and time again to get through a crucial piece of legislation before Parliament is prorogued. But ministers finally gave in to demands by the Tories and their backbenchers to introduce age or functionality restrictions on social media for under 16s, where we know that there was government scepticism about that and possibly about the implementation.
Absolutely. The calling down announced by Education Minister Olivia Bailey came late night in the Commons, which is never a good sign. It means that the government is going to preempt their own consultation, also never a good sign. And it comes after massive pressure from a Tory campaign led by Laura Trott and Lord Nash, which is also uncomfortable. Because it effectively had the sympathy of many, many Labour MPs, also not a good sign. Now, what's been agreed isn't a ban on social media for under 16s, and it could stop well short of that, but it is action sooner than the next Parliament, which is really what the Tories were trying to bring forward. And more than anything else, it's just an 11th hour concession that ministers didn't want to give, although I'm sure they'll be putting a brave face on it this morning.
And we've got less than 24 hours to sort out remaining legislation. 13 active bills still to deal with before Parliament prorogues tomorrow. There's the courts and tribunals bills with those proposals to curb jury trials, also the subject of a Labour revolt, which we're waiting to see what fate that meets.
Yeah, that's completely right. One of my big tests for Keir Starmer, as regular listeners of this podcast will know, is can he get difficult stuff through the Commons? Because he needs to be able to do that. And it's been hard, even though he's got a landslide majority. Right. It's a huge day. And I think just the backdrop of last night's troubles is one element of it. Another is you've got all of the Mandelson disclosures and hearings this morning. In many ways, one of the ones that could be around which there's the most unpredictability is that we're going to see somebody in public that we've just never heard of before. You called him a cavity. I don't think the public have heard the voice of Morgan McSweeney, the sort of Irish brogue that we are about to be subjected to. That's quite a moment.
I just can't stop thinking of him now as McCavity, the mysterious cat in T.S. Eliot, because he seems to be somehow involved in or behind everything. But as you say, we never get to see or hear him. But yeah, he is giving evidence mid-morning to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. This is itself a moment of jeopardy because everyone knows he was at the PM side from 2019 to February this year. He's turned into something of a caricature in Westminster circles. Bit of a someone who takes the brunt of a lot of blame for pretty much everything that they want to accuse Keir Starmer of. But for others, he's still a bit of a cult hero. They credit him with bringing Labour back from the doldrums to power in that 2024 landslide. So when you judge him, you're judging Starmer.
And you just don't know how it would be in front of Emily Thornberry. Keir Starmer is doing nothing to distance himself from Morgan McSweeney. He was actually asked about it by Cathy Newman on our interview with the PM last night. And, I mean, listen to how recently they hung out.
When did you last communicate with him?
2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. We had a catch-up. I can't remember precisely.
So you're still friends?
Yeah, I've known Morgan for a very long time. We worked together in changing the Labour Party and picking it up after a terrible election victory in 2019.
But,
and we worked together on the general election. No, he resigned, but we have worked together for 8 or 9 years. He is a friend as well as a colleague. And
do you miss him?
Well, I talk to him from time to time, and I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago that we last got together to talk about a number of things.
So you haven't spoken to him about his evidence tomorrow?
No, I haven't.
So that goes to the question that Labour MPs were sort of raising with me last night, which is, could the McSweeney testimony be a moment of jeopardy? Because it is just such a question of, how he comes across will also feed into verdicts on Keir Starmer's reliability and judgment of character, which is something that we keep coming back to. Does he bestow the aura of someone who rightly was given one of the most powerful positions in the country, even as he's being asked questions about what happened to his mobile phone?
And I have to say, if he's still romancing with the Prime Minister, as in Cathy's clip there, if he's seeing the Prime Minister, what are they talking about? And if they're still that close, why did he resign? So many mysteries. It's just a day with a lot of pitfalls. I'm sure even many listeners to this podcast might be getting a bit fatigued by the ins and outs of the Mandelson affair as it drags on. This phase is about to hit its 2-week anniversary. Keir Starmer saying he's frustrated it's got so much coverage. Other ministers, loyalists are echoing that. So that's turning into a bit of a line to take. But the point is that it's an episode that reflects so many of the things that capture flaws in the Starmer premiership: a lack of attention to detail, lack of political nous, a lack of certainty about who or what he is opposing, and just a lack of general sense of direction and purpose to the government he wants to lead. And there was a big new piece of evidence that raises a lot of those doubts all over again.
Yeah, bear with me. I know the Mandelson affair is complicated and at times knotty, but what happened last night, in the sort of quite late last night, is well worth explaining. As listeners know, Keir Starmer sacked Ollie Robbins for failing to tell Number 10 that Peter Mandelson supposedly failed the vetting. In return, Robbins argued that Mandelson didn't fail it in a binary sense, as Number 10 suggested. Actually, the process is more complicated. They followed everything, all the procedure correctly. And by the way, Number 10 was putting such pressure on the process that they felt the need to rush it through. Well, what happened last night was that the government released 2 sides of written evidence from the former Foreign Office head of security. At the heart of all of this, Ian Collard, who corroborated Ollie Robbins' entire account, the same Ollie Robbins that the Prime Minister sacked a fortnight ago. He said that the Mandelson case was a borderline one, that you could have had mitigation, safeguards in order to give him the security clearance after all. They said that he didn't see the tick box recommending against Mandelson's appointment that Number 10 produced a couple of weeks ago. And he said that he felt under pressure. The document's in the form of a Q&A, and the final Q is, did you or your team feel under pressure? And the answer just begins, yes, pointing to the sheer volume of contact from Number 10 that meant that they felt that they really needed to get this done ASAP.
I suppose they could still argue. I always think about that point about pressure, that is it pressure if you're told to get on with something fast? It can be felt to be so, but the entity, the body, the people who just want you to get on something fast would say, well, that's our bit of the process. We just want the process done faster. And I think that's still, I don't think that will ever be resolved. I think people will just take different views about this when they look at this extraordinary chapter in the government's fortunes. And thinking about where we are, I do wonder if Starmer was properly advised and armed with all of the facts, even when you look at that kind of ambiguity that people can reasonably disagree when he went to war with Ollie Robbins, because Number 10 acted so swiftly to sack the former permanent secretary at the Foreign Office on the Thursday night 2 weeks ago. If the Prime Minister, after all, a top lawyer, knew what we all know now, would he really have gone ahead with it? That's a counterfactual he might not like to reckon with.
So many bits of evidence that challenge the Prime Minister's own narrative that have emerged since that moment. And it just raises a huge question for the team around Starmer, including, I think, because so much of this is about civil service, the civil service and procedure, the new Cabinet Secretary, Antonio Romeo, for whom this is really, I think, the first big public test. And also a reminder that the other key posts that would have been advising, where the person would have been advising Starmer, are sort of filled by temporary figures. He doesn't have a permanent chief of staff. He doesn't have a permanent director of communications. So again, kind of Keir Starmer's relationship with those around him, I think, in the spotlight as a proxy of all of this. So all of that is the context for this afternoon's votes on whether or not to refer Keir Starmer, whether MPs will refer Keir Starmer to the Privileges Committee, which would require 80 MPs on the Labour benches to not side with their own government, which feels unlikely.
Well, let's go through the nuts and bolts. I'm going to use Playbook as my handrail here. That could kick off as early as 12:45. The Conservative leader will open for the Tories. Alex Burghardt will close for the opposition. The decision hadn't been made last night on who will be making the case for the government, but it sounds like it could be the PM's most constant wingman, Darren Jones, and the votes are due by 7 p.m.
The wording of the Badenoch motion was published late last night. It basically says that Starmer on 4 different occasions misled the House, ranging from his assurances that full due process was followed and that Robbins was absolutely clear that nobody put pressure on him to make this appointment. The motion says Starmer may have misled MPs based on those comments, and so a possible contempt of the House should be investigated by the Privileges Committee.
Starmer's case for defence is that this is one big political stunt, a phrase he used 4 times in Cathy Newman's interview on Sky last night, arguing it's a waste of time when all the focus should be on fighting the effects of 2 wars. It'll be, and he does mean Iran and Russia, he doesn't just mean inside the Labour Party, it'll be a 3-line whip for Labour MPs to oppose it, so the government knows how essential this is. Otherwise, Cabinet loyalists wouldn't have been ringing round wavering MPs last night. Sounds a bit of a rinse and repeat of the near-death experience that Keir Starmer had with his premiership in February. So they managed to get Angela Rayner on side again. And Playbook says, on top of a string of statements released by Labour grandees, the Times is hearing that one MP on the fence had calls from a whip, 2 cabinet ministers and 2 senior backbenchers. All of that attention did make them decide to stay loyal. But goodness, that's a lot of arm twisting and promises just in order to get, Common Garden MP to be loyal to the Prime Minister. How do you think it is going to go, Sam Coates?
So I think that the government wins comfortably. I think that every abstention will be scrutinised on the Labour side. But the truth is, because it's a proxy confidence vote and we're 9 days away from local elections, I don't think Labour MPs want to dunk this administration. So it's a pretty solid result. But for me, the biggest thing is that Keir Starmer has, in order to achieve what will be a pretty comprehensive backing for him in the Commons, he's had to wheel out the big guns. And he's put the whole machine behind getting a solid result today. Now, this feels to me like the second time he's put the whole government machine to work to his benefit when he's been in trouble. The last time was when Anna Sarwar, Scottish Labour leader, went over the top and called for him to go. And he's doing a big effort today. But my question is, all of that for this, when the real moment of jeopardy isn't until after the local elections, how many more bullets does he have in that gun that he can fire before he finds a blank?
It's fascinating, isn't it, to think all of this is happening, this whole government machine and all this coordination and effort and the late nights and the putting pressure on people to get them to do the right thing, as Keir Starmer sees it. It is really about a process, and it's about something that kicked off because Keir Starmer appointed the wrong ambassador, who was imposed only a year ago, where I was last night at the embassy here in Washington. And as you say, it starts to look completely disproportionate. Keir Starmer saying, we in the media, we got obsessed by it, we're just litigating it to death. But actually, could look at the other way around. It is this government that has backed itself into a situation where it has to use all of the machinery just to keep the Prime Minister in post. That might be a question which, if asked a third time, could turn out perhaps less lucky.
You have neatly brought us back to where you are, Anne. We can't go without asking, what did you end up wearing at the garden party, and what were the big things that you saw? Tell us a bit about how diplomacy should be done, including fashion diplomacy, on your part.
Well, we finally got to the big scoop drop intro on this podcast. I went for iridescent blue silk thing I picked up in holiday in Vietnam because I thought that way there wouldn't be 3 other female denizens of Washington in the same posh frock. And the politics of fashion, which I know is close to your heart, Sam. But Claire, Lady Turner, the ambassador's wife, I had a chat with her because she's wearing this very beautiful flowing blue Edeline Lee dress. Now, you might remember, or more fashion-aware listeners, even than Sam Coates, might remember that she is the Canadian designer based in London. She makes her clothes in the UK, who dressed Victoria Starmer for that very nice picture of Vic Starmer at Labour conference in a red dress.
And just in summary, where does it feel like we are? It's been difficult between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump in recent weeks, but the backdrop is tricky too. Our trading relationship isn't exactly perfect either. How are people on the British side approaching it? And do you think there's any sign of the special relationship improving anytime soon?
Well, were we not so distracted by the government trying to save its own skin all the time, I think we would be reporting on this in a lot more detail. You're right. The US president only last week, Sam, threatening to impose a big tariff on the UK. Those tariff wars and tariff threats still ongoing unless we drop a digital services tax that impacts US tech companies. And the big argument is really between those. There are business lobby groups. There are certainly lots of people across the political spectrum saying, come on, you've got to make more counter threats. Don't always be at the end of this leash for Donald Trump, and even some people calling for a trade bazooka like the EU, a sort of retaliation measures. Now, that's absolutely not what the diplomats here think is the right thing to do. They think that the negative rhetoric has been amped up too far. A lot of them were not happy to hear the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, using the word folly about Donald Trump's Iran strikes on Iran, and that they think that it means that you can think it, but you shouldn't say it, because really what you need to do is just keep your own policies going, don't do anything that you don't want to do, but why pick that fight? So I think last night was about trying to smooth that over.
Well, it all depends on whether or not we have a functioning government the other side of the May elections, I guess, which today will determine in lots of different ways. Okay, I think a bulging podcast today because there is so much going on. Right, we will be back in the morning when so much will have been determined and we'll have a better grip on the fate of this government at home and abroad. I look forward to seeing you later.
See you tomorrow.